Welcome to Hacking the Truth. I'm James Trinkle Clements.
And I'm Bob Wallace.
Bob, we're going to talk about an interesting subject today. What makes us what we are?
Now we're talking about us as people, or we're talking about all the many groups out there?
Well, I think us as people do form groups. So we're really going to talk about both. And the way we arrive at the way we think, is it our inborn genetic probability to end up the way that we're ending up? Is it environmental? Is it intellectual? Is it educational? What makes us what we are and our surroundings and our family?
Well, that actually brings up one of my biggest pet peeves.
Okay.
And that is that it's either A or it's B. And there's nothing else. Either you're a Democrat or you're a Republican. Either you're this race or that race.
So it's a divided mind.
Right, the divided mind.
Okay.
And the truth is, all of those things play a factor. But I think for most people, in the beginning of their lives, it's their family, what they're taught about who they are and who they're not, that determines a lot of what they are later. If you ask most people, who are you? Do you know who you are? Of course I know who I am. And my bet is they don't have a clue. And they don't know they don't have a clue.
But are they not basing who they are on their five senses? Taste, smell, feelings, especially feelings? And they believe that's who they are. This individual, they've been told who they are programmed to believe who they are.
Right. Well, we got a couple different levels there. I mean, you can talk about it on what are we that's more than human, okay, which is a little bit where you were bringing up. I'm concerned about us, let's learn how to be good humans first. You know, I don't think you can do what they call an end around being human and just go straight to the spiritual. But I would, given the crises and everything that we have today, and the blindness, the extreme dualities, where a person who's like 1% something is all wrong and needs to lose their jobs or makes one little comment.
The cancel culture.
Yeah, the cancel culture, which is new terminology for me. And I mean, I would think anybody would be embarrassed to say that, oh, I believe in a cancel culture. Right? What's worked for thousands of years, all of a sudden I've decided in my infinite wisdom no longer serves to function, and we're going to do something new. We don't know quite what it is. We don't know where we're going, but we just know you can't be the way you are.
Okay, that's something new you've talked about or mentioned. Is that communism? Is that socialism? Is that progressivism? And what's the difference?
Well, I remember some years ago finding out that the very first dictionary published in the United States was somewhere in the middle 1800s. I assumed that they had dictionaries 1,000 years ago. And I'm sure they had some of a sort, but what I'm getting at is there's a disagreement on what words mean, and words can mean multiple things, and the meaning of words can change. In our modern era, the word racism is almost never used in the context of its original meaning, where you thought your race was superior to another race. That's the classical racism, but that's not. Anytime you read about racism now, it's got nothing to do with that.
No, a lot of it's just difference of opinion.
Yeah.
And well, you're a racist if you don't believe this way. But now what permeates our culture is people, in my view, protesting things they truthfully have no knowledge of, because our educational system has been broken for so long. They're not taught true history and civics and Americanism versus communism and history of the world and religions, that the structure of learning and reasoning has been turned over to the federal government, and the intentional dumbing down of America has happened. And that's one of the biggest problems we have.
Well, in the big picture of what we're talking about, it's that when we are young, we believe what parents tell us. We believe what teachers tell us. We believe what the government tells us, what our coach tells us, what the priest tells us. And we incorporate that into our worldview. And the question is, what is it that allows certain people to all of a sudden say, is that really true? Do these people really know what they're talking about? And I feel today, a lot of the young people, they haven't gotten to the point where they're no longer just accepting whatever's told them by whoever they think is an authority, and they're not thinking, well, is that really true? Is it partially true? Is there a middle place that's okay? And it's just phenomenal to me. Now, I want to go back to my own life. Remember being a hippie? You were a hippie, I know you were. Went to San Francisco, love child, everything, right?
Yeah, well, we may find some pictures of me earlier, and I was way a hippie.
Yeah. I remember having sort of a revelation that here I was, an anti-materialist and all the rest, that I was able to survive because of the materialism of all the people that I criticized. I lived off of the furniture they didn't want anymore, the clothes they didn't want anymore. And all of a sudden I realized, hey, actually they created the basis for me being and living the lifestyle that I want to live. Right? Another thing I learned was that all the people who I thought were trying to find freedom and expand their horizons, most of them were phonies. They were just doing it because it was popular, they're going with the flow, but there was no deep commitment that they had in anything. So I realized that all this stuff I was thinking about myself, that we're so great and all that, I realized was all nonsense. And that's what got me going. I think I told you the story that when I was 12 years old, someone gave me the book, The Way of Zen. And remarkably, and I can't express how remarkable this is, I actually held on to it until I was in college. And I read it, and that sort of started my search, like, what is truth, and learning about all these kinds of things. So my question is, why doesn't everybody have this aha moment where they say, everything I believe isn't really true? I need to take a good look and see, do these people have motives for what they're doing? What do they get out of it? Are they just want to be popular themselves? That's the only reason they're saying it. And it doesn't seem that that's happening on much of a level.
I think part of the reason it's not happening, number one, is the dumbing down of the system and the instant communication we have. People will make snap judgments on certain things that happen within the society now, and they'll have a flash mob there in 30 minutes protesting it or doing whatever they feel is their right to protest and overthrow and rebel against without any thought of the whole process of how this transpired. Both sides, I've always said there are three sides to every story, the right, the left, and the truth, which is right in the middle. But there's no exploring anymore because information is right at our fingertips, but that information, if it's flawed to begin with, the outcome of your reaction is going to be flawed. But when you've made those horrible mistakes, you can't go back in time and change and say, oops, we were wrong. But now we have a culture where we can put into place, even in our government, a system that absolutely fails. And no one will take credit for the failure, but we need to throw more money at it. It's not that we need to put checks and balances in place or jettison altogether. I've made the example many times. It's like planting a tomato seed and expecting to grow grapes. Ain't gonna happen. You're gonna grow tomatoes. But if the idea is wrong to begin with, it's never gonna bear the fruit you hope. But no one wants to accept the responsibility.
Well, you remember we've discussed the idea that in our government, as a generality, it seems that the Democrats start all the new programs. And once it's started, once it has a bureaucracy, once it has a life and has funding, somehow it's immortal. The Republicans never say, well, with the exception of Obamacare, they tried to repeal it unsuccessfully. But for the most part, they say, well, let's tweak this, let's fix this, let's make it a little bit better. We can do that.
Yeah.
But like you say, if you start out with the wrong premise, You're trying to fix something the wrong way. Doing more of it, throwing more money at it, doing more studies about it isn't going to work. And actually, we've talked about before, there's many situations where the government has actually paid for studies. And then because it didn't say what they wanted it to say, didn't come to the conclusion that they wanted, they attacked the people and said basically that they were frauds and didn't know what they were doing.
Yeah, very true. Yeah. And what we're talking about is whether it's a program or a person, when you find out you're on the wrong track, how do you stop it and go down another path or make checks and balances along the way? As individuals, I think we can do that if we are given the right information. But what if someone is born into a family who's taught that you must believe this about another person? You know, forget the color thing, anything. Be so prejudiced against another person, another institution, and you grow up with that, you believe that that's the way the world is. And you know, growing up believing you don't need any vaccine as a child, you never go to a doctor, you never, don't believe any of that. And there are people who are programmed that way and would never do it. Now, is that mind control? Is that just ignorance? How do you break out of that when it starts from childhood?
I don't know. You have to get lucky. You've got to find something that you cannot deny. Because we know people filter out what doesn't agree with what their position is. They dismiss it or say it's fraudulent in some way. So it would have to be something that's so overpowering that it basically just knocks the foundation out from underneath you. And that's one of the things I'm concerned about. That's actually what's going to happen in our society, that we are going to have a severe breakdown in society. Now, I went online to buy some clothing the other day. You know, I wanted something very specific. And I was shocked how many were advertising that they had it, but when you went to order it, they didn't have it. Now, a year ago, that didn't happen. And I'm thinking, this is just the beginning of a breakdown. I don't know how many people have really examined the chain of supply. You and I have talked about that and the necessity to bring back some of the things into this country, like the basic manufacturing of drugs that are used to make all kinds of other drugs. Right now, we're dependent on China for that. So we are really vulnerable to it.
Tremendously.
It may make sense from a businessman's point of view, because he's assuming everything will go well. He only cares about the moment. But when you look at it from a national security point of view, we're being very foolish. Right? It's like having a fight with the people down the road, and you ask them, hey, would you store all my guns and knives? Right? You don't know if you're going to get them if you need them later on. So that's definitely something that, honestly, there's so many false issues that everybody's fighting over. You know, I mentioned before that a professor from Northeastern University said that grammar is racist. Right? Now, remember we talked about the idea of microaggressions? Well, I was thinking about, there's a legal doctrine. I'm not going to try to make it sound like I know a lot by telling you what the Latin is for it. But basically what it means, it's so small it doesn't matter. And I thought, wouldn't it be nice if they said, well, these are microaggressions, and we're pointing them out because they're so small they don't matter.
Oh no,
Okay.
they become huge.
Yeah.
And they're saying, when we were growing up, sticks and stones can break my bones, but words will never hurt me.
Right.
Basically, if you ran into a jerk, you ignored the jerk and think, well, they'll get theirs one day, and you went on. And now it's full-fledged frontal attack. I'm going to bring you down. I'm going to squash you. And like you say, we bring up things in people's past 40 years ago that fun-lovingly, your intention was never to demean or hurt anyone, but you're portrayed as just the most villainous creature on earth. I find it rather laughable when I hear, and most of them are younger people now, talking about our founding fathers wanting to pull down statues of Washington, attacking them. And the reason they're able to do that is because of the system these people created. This America we have. Many of them lost their fortunes, lost their families, made tremendous sacrifices. That's never talked about. Who ended slavery? America. But no, there's never any credit. There's always finger pointing, and you're the problem. You're the problem. Capitalism is a problem. Capitalism has raised more people out of poverty than any other system ever created since the dawn of time.
Right. And we talked, in the past that sometimes if you have something that has been a major success in society, like capitalism has, in time people take all its fruits for granted. They forget that 400 years ago people lived in the direst poverty and were dying from all sorts of infectious diseases because there was no modern medicines. And this is all due to the capitalist system and patents and all the things that we know that makes our economy work. And then all they see is what they perceive as the flaws of capitalism. Does capitalism have a flaw? Sure. There is no system in the world that doesn't have a flaw. And also, there's no system that people can't mess up.
We will never have a utopian society.
Right.
And that's what we hear. We want utopia.
And utopian societies, unfortunately, often end up being anything but utopian as they try to use force to make that happen.
Okay, what makes us what we are then? Is it family? Is it education? And you say it's all of these things, but I think some of the biggest breakdowns we see, and you see people protesting who are actually in law school or have graduated from Harvard, from Yale. Their indoctrination, and they are indoctrinated by people who are, in my mind, so much more radical. They never get two sides to every story, and they're ripping down the fabric of America and their program. They go there for 4 years.
Yeah. I clearly think it's a weakness in their character, and they try to make themselves feel better. These are the people that are coming out with all this stuff. Makes them feel powerful because they can come out and say this is wrong and that's wrong, and I fight for justice and equality, and they have not even a clue what those words mean. And of course definitions of them are difficult because they've meant so many different things over time. I wish I had an answer for that, what to do about it. And I hate to say it, but it's almost like this one by one, right? You have to see the light one by one. There's no big light bulb you can turn on for everybody because so many people are stuck where they are. Now typically, this is what's interesting to me, is typically it's the young that tend to be more, it's A or it's B, because that's all they can think of. Anything else is too complicated for them. You're either a good guy, you're a bad guy. Right? You're either popular or you're unpopular. Everything is in a dual system. That's the easiest way for them to think. They don't have to make careful gradations of all kinds of things in the middle. And I recently read a book called Beatles and Philosophy, and I'm shocked by probably how many people don't even know who the Beatles were. They were probably the best pop group or rock group or whatever you want to call them ever. There's been others that were better at certain things, but overall they were the best, and they were very socially minded. They did start out, like Paul McCartney said, with silly love songs, but they ended up doing a lot of social commentary and also personal commentary. And there is...
in fact, let me mention something about the Beatles. We're in Jacksonville, Florida. When they were going to perform here in 1964, they found out that it was segregated. There were blacks, if they even could come in, would be in a certain area. They said, we're not going to perform.
Yeah.
They didn't know what to do. Oh, what do you mean? No, we're not performing.
Right. Now, in the same time, they were being banned for being communists.
Yeah. So
and misleading the youth of a country.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I grew up, well, I don't know how much, but Elvis was the devil because
Sure.
he shaked his hips.
Sure.
You know, we had all this stupid stuff, you know.
But in my little notes here, there's a lyric I want to read. It's only
Okay.
2 sentences. And I'm not sure if it's from Revolution, the song, or it's
Say
just
you
on the
want a
album.
Revolution.
Okay. And he's talking about the fact that he's getting older, he's no longer a youth. And this is the lyric is this: but now those days are gone, I'm not so self-assured. Now I find I've changed my mind and opened up the doors. That's what we're talking about.
Yes.
The fact that you're a teenager and you think the world's black and white, I can accept that. But when you're 30 and 40, you should be getting over that, to realize the world is much more complex than black or white, red or blue, whatever you want to call it. And we've really had a failure of the older generation to pass on the good stuff to the younger generations.
You know, what you just read, the Beatles lyrics, when there becomes or can become a defining moment where that bit of light comes through and you think, maybe what I'm thinking is not totally correct. I should look at this a little differently. What I'm seeing today with so many people, with so much input from our media, from our phones, there's hardly any time for that light to come through because you have your mind going crazy. And what is our mind? Our mind is nothing but thoughts. But if you have 500 new thoughts a day from your phone, when is there time for that light to come through, Bob?
I guess we have to start reading books again.
Ah.
Yeah. Because sometimes it takes a while to understand what someone's saying. And a good author will write it many times. I was saying that one of the things that I think has happened is there's been a failure of the older generation, which is us, and people our age, give or take 10 or 20 years, has not passed on the wisdom of the elders, so to speak. That's been, instead, the wisdom of the elders has been totally discredited by, or presumption, they say they've discredited.
Usurped.
Usurped, maybe that's a better
usurped,
word for it.
there you go.
Yeah, by people that don't know where, they have almost no life experience. They've been hiding in academia their whole lives. Everybody thinks college professors have to be really smart. I have news.
No.
They're not smart at all, most of them. Having a PhD, which is a doctorate of philosophy, which is anything but. They usually write on these really obscure topics that no one's interested at all. And they're just not very impressive.
Well, I think part of the failure of the educational system is the brainwashing of believing that you must have a college degree. Well, a college degree, okay, for certain jobs, but getting away from developing a skill, a life skill that you can use. And we've really lost that by basing success on our system, our educational system, of how many kids we send to college, and we brag all the time, this minority, this so diverse. But the graduation rate is horrible because they can't do the curriculum.
One thing I read is interesting. I don't know if it'll come to pass. And I think it was somewhat promoted by the COVID. And because of COVID, there's going to hopefully be some reassessment of the way that we do things. And one of them is that education is going to completely change, and it's going to be much more focused. There's going to be no more 4-year degrees or 2-year degrees. You're going to just get certified in certain things. If you want to know about this, you take a couple courses in that. That's it. None of this going off for 4 years and doing whatever you do in college. Instead, it's going to be part of your careers, part of your growth. And
it's called an apprenticeship, isn't it?
Well, there's that, yeah. And actually, one of the things I always thought was interesting, and maybe this has a bigger example and bigger application, is that there was a time, and I think it ended somewhere in the early 50s, where lawyers didn't go to law school. They were apprentices.
I met some of them.
Yeah. And when their primary lawyer said to them, "You're ready to go out on your own," you were a lawyer, right? Now, at that point, they actually knew how to do what a lawyer does. When you graduate from law school today, you know almost nothing about what a lawyer does. Now, you have a good academic background, you know how to find law, you know how to read it and understand it, so those are important skills. But you actually don't know how to do what a lawyer does. And when you figure that out in law school and you ask the professors, they say, well, you have your whole career to figure that out. You know, we're just teaching you the basics. But I think there was something to be said for the old apprentice that when you got out of the system and on your own, you knew what to do. You knew how to do it. You'd already done it under the tutelage of a professional.
I'll give you an example, a personal example. I was always interested in advertising. I sold advertising for the newspaper, did a number of things. And one of my clients had an advertising agency, a smaller one, but a very profitable one. But I had applied for a large advertising agency. Well, I didn't have a degree in advertising, so they weren't going to hire me. There was just no way. And one day I came into the small agency owned by Bill Maher, and I just mentioned to him this billboard I saw and how bad it was and how I would have changed it. And he said, "That's really good. Where'd you come up with that idea?" I said, "Well, this is the way I look at that." Long story short, he ends up hiring me. I end up being a copywriter, producing, writing, and directing radio, television. Most of it was television commercials, print advertising, newspaper advert. I would have never gotten that total experience if I'd gone to, I would have been pigeonholed somewhere in that agency and they would never recognize what I could do. Yeah. And that's what you're talking about. You get good at what you're doing, or and then you go to learn it from someone.
Yeah. Just going along with that thought, it was actually my career was a business lawyer. I actually learned more about how to help my clients from the experienced businessmen, brokers, accountants, and all the rest of the people than I did by learning more law.
Sure.
Right, because you learn how deals work, you learn what is acceptable in your community, what's not acceptable in your community. You know when to say no. They don't teach you in law school when to say no. Where you say, okay, it's time to get up and leave. We're just wasting our time here, that kind of thing. You learn all that stuff from people that already know how to do it. And this gets back to this thing. Why haven't the younger people been taught what they need to know?
I can only tell from personal experience. I think we used to say the silent majority, and that was the middle class, the upper middle class, and we called them the silent majority. We didn't speak out enough. We didn't speak out when we saw the welfare system going south because we didn't want to be called a racist. I'm not a racist, I'm a realist. This is not going to work the way you envisioned it to work. And I said on my talk show 35 or 40 years ago that there's going to be a huge tidal wave that's going to hit the inner cities when all these children who are born out of wedlock become so great in numbers, we're going to start to have a breakdown of society. And I said that 40 years ago, 35 or 40 years ago. It's inevitable, it's a numbers game. No disparaging remark on the race, whether you're white or you're black or you're Hispanic or whatever. If you continually have children out of wedlock without a father in the home, you're going to start to have a breakdown of the nuclear family. And that's what happens. And what happens then, you have angry people.
Yeah. It seems strange that, and I think probably the most massive failure of government is that they don't actually check to see whether what they're doing works at all. It's phenomenal. And so they get more and more programs that don't work. You and I have talked about every business they've ever taken over, whether it was the railroads or post office or all those kind of things, they fail at it miserably. And they never seem to say, well, obviously what we're doing is not working, right? Now, I remember during Obama's time when they were promoting the notion that there's now 45 million people on what we used to call food stamps. And they thought, isn't that great? We've got more and more people to sign up. Aren't we being helpful? And I'm thinking, isn't that showing that something's an abysmal failure? That people can't even afford to get their own food? I mean, is the answer to buy the food? Everybody knows the story about the fisherman and the fish, right?
Yeah, teach him how to fish and he eats for,
Right, right. But even that simple, that's almost like childlike knowledge.
Well, I used to be surprised. I'm not surprised anymore when I do tune into these hearings they have, and I listen to the elected officials and the newly elected people. Their intellectual level is so low. It really is. Their comprehension of what's going on in the problem with politics, there's no qualifications to run for office. And I think that's and we'll never have that. But what the mass of people now, and the people they will elect astounds me. You go back to Barbara Jordan, and those people we had in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. I think the last president who had any clue whatsoever was Ronald Reagan. And I'm an independent. I'm not a Republican or a Democrat. But he talked about communism, socialism, what can happen. And he was the last one to actually voice it that I've heard.
I would think right now there's 4 or 5 burning issues that should be the sole focus of Congress, and none of them are even looked at. It's just almost beyond belief that these people that seemingly have all the resources they could ever need to find out, well, what's the real problem in the country? I don't hear any of them speaking out against political correctness, showing its shortcomings. Right?
No, and you won't.
And I'm not saying that there's no foundation for it, right? And there are some, it's always nice to be polite and all that, but the key thing is they just disregard all that, I don't know what's happening now with this, the ridiculous notion of defund the police. I liked what Dinesh D'Souza said about that. The primary job of the government is not to provide welfare. It's not to send you to school and give you school loans. It's to protect you from other countries and other people encroaching on you, harming you, stealing from you, killing you. That's their primary job. And if they don't do that, what do we have them for?
Well, I like it on one side, and that particular side said, we want gun restrictions, we want to do like Australia and take away your guns, and then we'll be better off. By the way, we also want to get rid of the police. Okay, I don't have a gun and I don't have police. I think I could be a victim here pretty soon. Yeah. Let's talk, getting back to what makes us what we are. I know you know what the Stockholm Syndrome is. Patty Hearst, the Symbolize Liberation Army in the 60s, was kidnapped. And I know we're old and these people may not know what it is. Yeah, you remember. Well, she was kidnapped. She was Randolph Hearst's granddaughter or daughter. And they eventually brainwashed her into believing that she should be a fighter. She should be part of this army. And then she started robbing banks along with them, fighting what this, constrictive America has done to her.
She didn't shoot anybody, I don't think.
No, she didn't shoot anybody. But what I'm getting to is you get a hold of a person and you lock them in a room and you go, and the way they treated her, they went in and 3, 4, 5, 6 hours a day, all they did was talk to her. And then they would leave the next day. And she eventually was changed. I think what we have today with the media, with the cell phones, with the opinions, we have a mass masses of people that are victims of the Stockholm Syndrome. They've locked into idealism so great, and they have been transformed.
You know, that's interesting. I wouldn't have thought of that, but the parallel runs pretty strong. And the key to that is that there's no on, off, on, off, on, off.
No.
It's continually on, and that's what makes the difference. You're right. They don't have the time to think. I like vacations. I leave my cell phone in a house. People are afraid to leave their house without their cell phone. When I was young, I would travel around the United States without no one knew where I was. They didn't even know what part of the country I was in. I never thought about it.
Well, now the algorithms where if you're on Facebook or you're on certain sites, just like they know what you're going to buy or what you like, and you get all these emails about, well, they also politically, they know you're going to be given your side of the story they think you want to hear that will make you lean more that way, whether it's left, right, conservative, liberal. You will be fed this. It's like someone watching Fox News 24 hours a day or watching CNN all their waking hours. It's a Stockholm Syndrome. Mentally, they are changed.
So they're not giving you a chance to think.
No. That's
deep, Jim.
I believe that's what's happened to America, because when I was growing up and you were growing up, we would hear things and people would say certain things, and common sense came in and said, no, you got to prove that to me. I'm from Missouri. Mm-hmm. You know, show me some facts. Where'd you get this information? We'd question that, and it may be someone we thought highly of. That's not, and then we would get the answer, and we would either say, hey, they were right or they were wrong. There's no more searching for answers. It's my side believes this, I hear this all the time, that's the truth. And that's the Stockholm Syndrome. You're captive of that thought. You're captive of that programming.
So skepticism is no longer a virtue.
No.
You and I have discussed a little bit. It was a book that was written some years ago by Miguel Ruiz called The Four Agreements. And sometime after that, they put out another book, and it was called The Fifth Agreement. So here you have a little skinny book that have about 4 basic ideas, and then you have one book that's about one idea alone. It was doubt. The whole book was about doubt as a great virtue, and they apologized for omitting it from the first one. And it's a good book if anybody ever wants to read it. Actually, their books are very accessible. I mean, you can read it, understand it. You don't have to. I've tried to wade through some of the German philosophers, and believe me, my mind went on numb after about half the page.
It is.
Except for Nietzsche. He was fun. He had a way with
Yeah.
words. But some of the other
as
ones,
flawed as he was.
Yeah.
And he was flawed.
Oh, yeah, he was flawed for sure. I mean, he was anything but the ideal that he presented.
Yes.
Right. Well, I mean, look at one person that we've talked a little bit lately about, Karl Marx. Very few people who say they're Marxists have ever really read anything more than the flyleaf of a couple of his books. They know a couple of his quotes, and that's it. And part of the reason why is it's very, very hard to read his books. He basically wrote continuously for decades with no attempt to synthesize or bring out a summary. So he's very difficult for anybody to read, and certainly you can just sort of hunt and peck your way through his stuff and get what you want out of it. But he definitely is a very difficult read because he made up words all the time too.
Well, as we wrap this up, what makes you what you are? I want to continue it the next time we get together and talk about the spiritual aspect, because I believe that's what can transform people to look at the world differently and the programming they get. Not necessarily religious, could be, but what is our spiritual makeup? What makes us what we are, as far as the other side, which is kindness, which is forgiveness, which is doubt. And during our generation, it was question everything. Remember that?
Right.
That was, well, you do need to question everything. But if you can let the true light come through, then the world you see will change, and we can talk about that.
Yeah. And the only thing I add is what I said before, and that is, you're not who you think you are.
Find out who you are.
Right.
Who am I?
And if you
That's what
tell
I
me
ask myself every
you know
day.
exactly who you are, then I know for sure you don't know
You
who
don't
you
know
are.
who you are. You're right. And we hope you know who you are, and you can find out who you are as we found out who we are. And
Yeah.
we will see you next time on Hacking the Truth. I'm James Shrinkle Clements.
I'm Bob Wallace.
Take care.